dando la bienvenida a todos. Algunas de las clases ya han sido colocadas en YouTube y todas las clases se irán poniendo en inglés, francés y portugués.
You can listen to this class in any of these languages due to our very dedicated interpreter
Podéis escuchar estas traducciones gracias a los dedicados traductores.
So far, 142 people have registered.
Se han registrado 142 personas de 12 países de África y de 24 países del mundo. Hay 25 palestrantes de varios países de África y del mundo. Hoy es la clase número 7 y es sobre uno. Nuestro palestrante de hoy es Dada Ravi Shekarananda.
Yogic monk and yoga teacher in the inner world for 24 years. He's also a social activist who believes that humanity is undergoing a change of historical consciousness. He's presently based in the Middle East in Cairo sector.
Él está trabajando, Dada está trabajando ahora mismo en el Medio Oeste. Dada Ravi Shekarananda, gracias, puedes empezar. Dada agradece por la presentación y gracias a todos por invitarme. Quiero compartir la pantalla ahora.
Okay. How's that looking?
It's all right, but can you put it into slide show mode?
Okay. All right, for anyone interested, here is some contact information for me.
Para alguien que le interese, estos son los contactos de Proud y mi contacto personal. Quien quiera estar en contacto, quien me quiere escribir a ese email y el teléfono, y ese teléfono también es WhatsApp. Desde del capitalismo, la globalización del capitalismo a una familia universal. Por supuesto, es una presunción muy grande mía para el poder hablar de África. Tengo muy poco contacto con África, aparte de en Egipto, donde trabajo un poco en el norte de África, de vez en cuando, en mi trabajo. Sin embargo, he sido educado, estudiado en los principios de Proud. Y esto es un esfuerzo de usar esto para crear un marco de Proud, para hacer un análisis, primeramente, del estado del capitalismo, la globalización del capitalismo en el mundo. Y más allá de esto, articular esto como una familia universal. Entonces, sí, espero.
Hello?
Yeah. You're going fine.
So I don't have to stop for translation, is that right?
No, just go slowly, and that would be
slowly.
Perfect.
Okay.
It would be perfect if you talk slowly. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I hope that people can take something of use and value from the presentation. Okay, so this is my effort at mapping out a broad historical framework.
Este es
Of course, there was a very
un
long
mapa.
Sorry?
Dada, excuse me. Probably it's best if you pause after each sentence. A
Okay.
little bit. Just a little bit. Because it's so easy to talk quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Dada.
Maishalanji, it seems the translation in Portuguese coming from the English side, and his speech in Portuguese coming in English coming on the Portuguese side. Just if you can inform.
I'm sorry, what are you saying?
The translation in Portuguese is coming in the English side. When you open the English, you hear in Portuguese. And when you listen to Dada, you hear him from the Portuguese side.
Amitabha, it says English to Spanish. Victoria, it says English to Portuguese. I don't understand the problem, Dada.
Okay then.
It says Guruvati, English to French.
Entonces,
Okay,
vamos
carrying on.
Okay.
Entonces vamos a seguir, porque es un tema muy largo, vamos a seguir. Parece que hay un problema en la traducción en portugués, pero... Entonces tenemos una larga historia desde la época precolonial que han tenido las naciones africanas. Entonces hay un periodo muy brutal. Esto es un triste capítulo de la historia humana.
And we're not going to get the chance to do that, but obviously it's important to place the contemporary moment in that broader colonial framework, because the impact is
Entonces es importante analizar el momento actual dentro de un marco del colonialismo, porque todavía sus consecuencias están presentes. Estamos en un periodo neocolonial que hoy hemos oído hablar mucho últimamente, especialmente en las últimas semanas. Y entonces es lo que se llama la época postcolonial, que se distingue un poco del neocolonialismo. Y este estado postcolonial, según lo veo, está orientado según un modelo capitalista de desarrollo o un capitalismo de Estado, en el caso de varias naciones africanas. Por ejemplo, Ghana y Algeria son países que están experimentando socialismo, país africano, y el Estado tiene bastante parte de la propiedad. Y la cuestión es, entonces, la cuestión ahora es el futuro. ¿A dónde vamos? ¿Cuáles son las opciones para el futuro desde aquí, para África?
Okay.
Con respecto a la historia postcolonial, en los años 60 y 70 son fechas importantes. Hay un desarrollo social y económico, un préstamo bastante pesado, y hay lo que se llama EASY, industrialización, sustitución de la industrialización por las importaciones. Mucho endeudamiento muy grande. Entonces, esto significa, en lugar de industrializar, muchas naciones optaron por importar. Entonces, algunas naciones optaron por producir localmente productos que antes estaban importando. En los años 80 hay una crisis en las deudas nacionales y, por supuesto, con la participación del Fondo Monetario Internacional en programas de ajuste estructural, a menudo condicionando los préstamos a quitar los subsidios a los alimentos, liberalización del comercio, enforzar un equilibrio en el presupuesto y congelar el aumento de los salarios. Esto hizo que surgiera un aumento del desempleo, un éxodo rural y una caída en el nivel de vida. En el papel del Fondo Monetario Internacional y el Banco Mundial, en el acuerdo en instituciones que se hicieron un acuerdo en Bretton Woods. Esto fue una conferencia de muchas naciones en 1944, después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, y creó una estructura global mundial, un sistema. Estas dos instituciones, claro, por supuesto, jugaron un papel muy importante en África. Y al mismo tiempo se desarrolló una Comisión Económica de las Naciones Unidas para África. Entonces, hay un énfasis en la economía de mercado, un enfoque neoliberal. Entonces, contrastando con esto del Bretton Woods, en algunas Naciones Unidas de África parecen enfatizar más la industrialización y un papel mayor del Estado. Y hay dos enfoques, uno más liberal y otro uno que hace aumentar más el papel del Estado.
Okay. I can.
Entonces tenemos el Banco Mundial y el Fondo Monetario Internacional, y por otro lado tenemos las Naciones Unidas Comisión para África. Entonces tenemos esos dos, como Ghana y Argelia, que promueven la industrialización de África. Hay otras iniciativas en el sur de África, lo que se llama COMESA, el mercado común de los países orientales y del sur de África. Estos son los países que son miembros de esta COMESA, los que están en verde. Libia, Egipto, Sudán, Etiopía, Kenia, Zambia, Madagascar. Algo más reciente, en el último mes, hubo una reunión, una asamblea en San Petersburgo de África con Rusia, países de África. Esto fue un esfuerzo de nuevo, el desarrollo panafricano en la industria, la infraestructura, la ingeniería, la agricultura, en la transferencia tecnológica, el desarrollo de la industria y la infraestructura de África. Al mismo tiempo, África tiene un desequilibrio con Rusia. Es mucho más lo que exporta. Entonces hay un desequilibrio.
Positive news, you may not have heard of this, but there was a write-down of the debt to Russia up to as high as $23 billion. Interestingly, not much reported in the mainstream media, at least in the Western countries. Okay, so that's sort of just a very broad overview of some of these initiatives that have been launched for the development of Africa and its economies. And we're going to contrast that with some other ideas in a minute. However, I'd like now to move into just giving a picture of what I see to be the status of capitalist globalization today.
Vamos a saltar a analizar el capitalismo, la globalización capitalista hoy día.
Capitalist project of globalization has arrived at today and possibly where it may be heading.
Esto probablemente es a donde estamos yendo hoy día.
Here's a rally.
Esto es una manifestación,
Sign there, capitalism isn't working.
El capitalismo no está funcionando, tiene esa pancarta. La democracia es una ilusión. Una moneda, un país. Esta es una de las crisis que está sufriendo el capitalismo global, especialmente el occidental. Aquí tenemos una cita de Chris Hedges, es un ganador del premio Nobel, el premio Pulitzer en jornalismo, y dice que en relación al estado de la Estados Unidos, dice: ahora vivimos en una nación donde los doctores destruyen la salud, los abogados destruyen la justicia, las universidades destruyen el conocimiento, los gobiernos destruyen la libertad, la prensa destruye la información, la religión destruye la moral y nuestros bancos destruyen la economía. Cita de premio Pulitzer de periodismo sobre Estados Unidos. Esto me parece que es más un comentario sobre Estados Unidos, parece que sobre todo todas las naciones capitalistas. Esto muestra la profundidad de la crisis actual de las naciones capitalistas. Esto es una acusación muy grave del sistema socioeconómico en que vivimos el capitalismo. Esto es otra frase de un antiguo consejero de seguridad nacional de Jimmy Carter. Dice: la era tecnotrónica envuelve una apariencia gradual de una sociedad más controlada. Esta sociedad estaría dominada por una élite controlando los valores tradicionales. Pronto será posible controlar cualquier vigilancia sobre cualquier ciudadano. Creo que esta frase nos da otra perspectiva de lo que está pasando en el capitalismo occidental. Aquí enfatiza la sociedad de vigilancia. Es algo que lo vivimos constantemente en los países occidentales. Cada vez que caminas por la calle hay cámaras por todos lados, o cada vez que entras en Internet. La vigilancia es una realidad diaria. Y esta es otra cita de Yanis Varoufakis, que fue un líder del movimiento griego. Seguramente lo conocéis, fue ministro de Economía en Grecia. Dice: tenemos una oligarquía con elecciones y las elecciones son compradas por la oligarquía. La oligarquía quiere decir dirigido por pocos, por una
And
élite.
he's of course talking about the
Por
advanced
supuesto, él está
capitalist
hablando
nations
del capitalismo
and
más
making the
avanzado, las
claim
naciones
they
más
are ruled
capitalismo más
by
avanzado, donde están
an oligarchy,
controladas
a
por
small
esta
elite.
oligarquía, por una pequeña élite.
And that elite buys the
Y esta
elections
élite
and
compra las
thereby
elecciones.
democracy
Y
has
así,
been
por eso,
completely
la
undermined.
democracia ha sido disminuida.
He's the author of
Este es el autor de este
titled
libro,
Techno-Feudalism.
Tecnofeudalismo,
In his analysis,
lo que
advanced
mató al
capitalism,
capitalismo. Y es un análisis del capitalismo,
which is what is driving
que es lo que
capitalist
está
globalization,
dirigiendo
can be
el capitalismo
described as
global hoy día, que
techno-feudal
se puede llamar un
in
poco
its
como
nature.
tecnofeudalismo en su
And again,
naturaleza.
feudalism,
Y de nuevo, feudalismo
the pre-capitalist
es
system that
el sistema
dominated many
precapitalista que
parts of the world.
dominó en
We
muchas
are
partes del
again a
mundo.
very small
Y de
elite,
nuevo, parece que estamos volviendo a eso, una pequeña
with
élite,
clerics in the form of priests and
clérigos,
religions
como en forma
dominating this
de
small elite,
líderes religiosos
or kings and monarchs.
o,
And then the
o
large
monarcas y
remainder of
reyes
the society were really
controlaban
serfs.
a toda la
There was, of
sociedad.
course, nobility there
Los
as a sort of
nobles,
interface between the
que era un
oligarchy at the
poco
top
entre los
and the
oligarcas
serfs at the bottom.
y los
Of course,
sirvientes,
serfs didn't own anything.
y los
But he's
sirvientes no poseían
making this
nada.
comment about advanced
Él hace
capitalism.
este comentario sobre el
Actually moving
capitalismo
towards
avanzado.
a feudalist
Parece que
system
estamos volviendo a un sistema feudal
that is supported by technology.
que está
And you
apoyado
remember again that
por la
quotation
tecnología.
earlier of
Y
the
acordaros
technotronic era
de la frase
and the
anterior sobre
surveillance
la
society.
era tecnocrática y la era de la vigilancia.
Okay, so this is, again, giving
Entonces, de
a
nuevo,
viewpoint about
dando
what is
un
the
punto de
state
vista
of
sobre el
the
estado
so-called advanced
de lo que se llama
capitalist
el
nations today.
capitalismo avanzado hoy día. El
From the
1% de los más
Guardian,
ricos
in the UK newspaper,
van
2018
a
reaches
poseer
1% on
dos
target to own
tercios de toda la riqueza
of all
para
wealth by
2030.
2030.
Dos tercios de toda la riqueza, un 1%. Estamos caminando
Absolutely
hacia eso.
mind-boggling.
Es
So as we
absolutamente,
look at the enormous
te
concentration of wealth
deja la mente
into a tiny
como la prioridad
number of hands,
está
a
concentrándose en
tiny
una
portion of
tan
the
pequeña
world population.
porción de la población.
And this apparatus or this
Y este
oligarchy,
aparato,
this
esta
elite
oligarquía, esta
that is
élite,
behind the movement
está
towards
detrás de todo el movimiento
a highly controlled society
de una
in the
sociedad
advanced
altamente
form of capitalism.
controlada del
Works through a
capitalismo
number
avanzado.
of
Y esta élite
organizations and
trabaja funciona a través
One
de
is, of
otras,
course,
muchas
finance,
organizaciones, por supuesto las finanzas,
and particularly international finance,
y
and
especialmente
particularly
las
the
finanzas
practice
internacionales,
of lending money to
como
nations,
esto de
very often
funcionamiento de
those
prestar
nations will be
dinero
completely incapable
a
of
naciones
paying back
que luego
those
después son incapaces de
loans.
pagarlo y se quedan en deuda
So control of
eternamente.
finance
Entonces,
and
el control de
ultimately
las
world
finanzas,
finance. Intelligence is referring to
la
intelligence
inteligencia,
agencies,
se refiere a las
the
agencias de
intelligence
inteligencia
apparatus,
o aparatos de
and
inteligencia,
the role again of
el papel de nuevo
controlling the
de
society,
controlar la
surveilling
sociedad,
the
vigilando
population.
a la población.
And of course, the military is there.
Por supuesto, el
Military is there
ejército
enforcing
también,
the,
implementando
let's
en fuerza
say, this approach to
este
social
enfoque de
management.
manejo de la sociedad.
Industry, the
La
controlling of
industria,
industry, of course, through the
controlando la
form
industria, por
of
supuesto, a través en la forma
transnational
de las
corporations.
corporaciones
So that is
transnacionales.
definitely an ongoing trend.
Esto es una tendencia que está
Industry
hoy en día.
in our local nations
Las industrias en
are
las naciones
increasingly
locales
controlled through
están
transnational
cada vez más
corporations.
controladas por las corporaciones
The governmental
transnacionales.
apparatus,
Y el aparato
comment
gubernamental,
earlier,
como comentamos
was that
antes,
elections of
las elecciones
governments
de los gobiernos
have now been compromised,
han sido comprometidas,
where
donde
the financial class is
la
able
clase
to
financiera
use their financial resources to
pueden
influence the
usar
outcome of elections and
su poder
therefore
financiero para
who we
influenciar las
get as
elecciones.
governments.
Y eso depende de quién tenemos como
Transnationals are
gobiernos.
there
Y
again,
las transnacionales,
transnational
ya hemos hablado
corporations,
antes, son las
and then
transnaciones,
organizations,
las
and these include the big
corporaciones internacionales, y
foundations,
las organizaciones que incluyen
often
las grandes,
presented as philanthropic
las grandes organizaciones filantrópicas
of billionaires
que están
or
creadas por
dynastic
millonarios
families,
o familias,
and a
dinastías
multitude of other
familiares.
organizations that all connect in that inner
Y,
point of the circle,
y todo esto está conectado con el centro de este círculo, que representa los intereses del capital internacional y de esa élite financiera que está en el centro de todo eso. Esto es un diagrama hace un análisis de lo que pasa en términos de la globalización. Fíjate, en la cima de este diagrama tenemos a esta élite, esta oligarquía, esta élite financiera. Tenemos esas fraternidades que se juntan, se reúnen. Y debajo de eso hay distintas, ¿ves? En el diagrama hay distintas capas. Después el control financiero, que hay distintos cuerpos, el Banco Mundial, el Fondo Monetario Internacional y los grandes bancos centrales. Este es el control financiero mundial. Y después el control de las corporaciones y de los recursos. Ahí están los bancos centrales y las multinacionales. Entonces, esa capa del control financiero. Debajo de esto hay otra capa que se llama control de los recursos a través de las corporaciones. De nuevo, las multinacionales son el vehículo para controlar los recursos mundiales. Puedo decir el nombre de algunos de ellas. La siguiente capa, el control de la población mundial. Y eso incluye política, gobiernos, incluye los ejércitos, la policía, las cortes y las prisiones. Incluye a los medios de comunicación, los sistemas educativos y la religión. Las creencias y las religiones. A través de esto se controla toda la población del mundo. Y abajo de tenemos a los sindicatos, las escuelas y las masas de la humanidad. Todo de nuevo nos da una idea cómo el capitalismo global funciona hoy día.
disturbing
Es
picture
una
here
muy
of
desconfortable, muy
of an
perturbadora esta
economic
imagen
system
de cómo está nuestro
very
sistema,
much centered around
muy
control
centrado
of
en el
resources,
control de los
control
recursos,
of finance,
el control de las
control
finanzas,
of our world
control
populations
de
down
la
to the
población
nation state
mundial
level.
a través, en,
And I think it's
en el nivel
important for
nacional.
us to
Es importante para nosotros
consider these
el
types of
considerar
interpretations.
este tipo de interpretaciones, que lo
Um,
tenemos resumido,
because
las,
it's
la élite, la fraternidad, el
wakes
control
up
financiero, control de
to
recursos,
the idea
control de
that
la
while
población,
political, social, economic power remains in the hands of a financial or merchant or capitalist elite,
entonces mientras
then
está
it's
en manos de una
likely
élite
that
todo el control de
the
los
movement
recursos
will
y de la
be
población.
towards entrenching the power of that elite or that superclass. Here is
Aquí tenemos
a picture of
una foto,
a politician, a South
un
African
político de
politician,
Sudáfrica,
Julius
un
Malema.
político
Some
sudafricana,
of
Julius
you
Malema,
know this
algunos
person.
ya le deben
Why I
conocer.
put him here
¿Por qué lo ponemos
is
aquí?
because I think to a great extent he understands what
Porque
was
él
going
entiende
on in
muy
this
bien lo que está pasando en el mundo hoy.
brief
Él fue
phase of
presidente
the
de
state
2008 al 2012
advanced capitalism today.
del Congreso Nacional
And
Africano,
he's
de la
made
Liga de la Juventud.
a number of public
Fue líder
statements that
de los
indicate
luchadores por la
he's
libertad
actually aware
económica
of what's going on in this
y fue
project
congresista
of
en la Asamblea Nacional de Sudáfrica
globalization.
de 2014 a 2022.
He's considered to be a far left politician,
Se considera un político de
president of the
izquierda
African National Congress Youth
un partido-
League,
o de
leader of
extrema
the Economic
izquierda,
Freedom Fighters since 2013, and an MP in the National Assembly of South Africa 2014 till 22.
Julius Malema.
However, if you listen to
Pero sin embargo, si le
some of
escuchas,
his
algunos de
public speeches and interviews,
sus charlas o sus
and
entrevistas,
he makes some very, very disturbing statements.
hace
And,
algunas
on one
afirmaciones muy
particular
perturbadoras.
interview, he made the statement that
En una entrevista,
at the
él
moment
dijo,
we are not
dice que en este
considering
momento no estamos
killing
considerando,
white South Africans.
curar a
And
los africanos, a
I
sudafricanos
wanted to
blancos.
put that in there to indicate that simply because a politician may have a very deep and revealing analysis
Entonces quiero
of what's
analizar esto
going
porque
on in terms of the capitalist
vemos
system
como un
and
político,
its
la visión que tiene un
agenda in
político sobre el
Africa.
sistema político de África.
It doesn't mean that that person would make a good leader.
No
a
significa
benevolent
que
leader.
el que
And I
sea
just
crítico
use
de la
him
situación no
as
significa que va a ser un
one
líder benevolente.
example. Now, what the status of the recent coup in Niger, it was a military coup.
En el
Some people
golpe que
consider
hubo en
revolution,
Níger, algunos
but
dicen
the
que ha
mere
sido una
fact
revolución,
that a group may succeed in taking political power,
pero
of
este
course, it
grupo,
doesn't mean
aunque
that
tenga control
that power will
político
be
de la
used
situación,
judiciously
no significa que necesariamente vaya a ser
for the
usado el
welfare
poder
of the people.
para el bienestar de todas las personas.
And we will address that issue in much more detail as we proceed.
Luego lo analizaremos más adelante, más en
So the
detalle.
question that things meant to be doing.
¿Qué,
What
qué-
is our real human purpose?
qué deberían estar haciendo los humanos? ¿Cuál es el verdadero
I hope
propósito
you can see the
humano?
connection between that question
Espero que veáis la conexión de esta
this
pregunta
topic of
con este tema,
society,
la
economy,
sociedad, la economía
and the liberation of human society.
y la liberación de la sociedad
Because
humana.
if we genuinely want
Porque si genuinamente
a
queremos
proper human society, we've got to
una
ask the
sociedad
question,
realmente
what
humana,
is our actual purpose as human beings?
tenemos que considerar cuál es el verdadero
And from
propósito.
the perspective
De una
of
perspectiva
yoga, which is
de
what my
yoga,
background is,
como mi
the
mi
answer to that
educación,
question lies with
la,
the word
la
dharma.
respuesta a esa pregunta
Dharma.
es en la
And
palabra
the word
dharma.
dharma,
La
it means
palabra
the
dharma
fundamental
significa las
characteristic of an
características
object.
fundamentales de un objeto.
So we can talk about what is human
Entonces podemos
dharma.
hablar de lo que
A
es el
simple
dharma
example actually
humano.
we often use is what is the dharma
Siempre el ejemplo
of
que
fire.
usamos más a menudo es cuál es el dharma del fuego.
The dharma of fire is to
El dharma del
burn.
fuego es quemar.
Characteristic is to burn.
Su característica es que quema.
If it doesn't burn, it's not fire.
Si no quema, no es
So
fuego.
we then ask the question, what is
Entonces
human dharma?
nos hacemos
Human
la pregunta, ¿cuál
purpose?
es el dharma humano? ¿Cuál es el
What are the fundamental
propósito
characteristics of
humano o la
human beings?
característica fundamental de un ser humano?
And
Y,
again, drawing on this
este
yogic
comprende
perspective,
4
we find that
dimensiones
it's
del punto de
quite
vista de yoga.
dimensional. It has four
Tiene 4
aspects to it.
características, 4 aspectos del dharma humano.
One, human
Uno,
beings want to
los seres
expand
humanos
their mind.
quieren expandir su
So
mente.
expansion, one
Expansión
characteristic.
es una característica. En
of
sánscrito,
human beings.
vistara, expansión.
Two, flow.
Dos,
Human beings want to come into a
los
flow
seres
that
humanos
is
quieren
higher
entrar
than
en un
their own
flujo
ego,
que está
their
más
own
allá de su propio
individual
ego, más allá de su
self.
propia individualidad.
So it's this idea of flow. Sometimes
Quieren
people
entrar en un
today use
flujo
the word
social.
zone, being
Algunas
in
personas
the
usan
zone.
la zona, usan el tema de la
So we
zona,
have
estar
this
en la
idea of
zona.
flow, bringing our mind
Queremos
into
traer
this
nuestra mente
higher flow, into
en
this
este
universal
flujo
flow.
del universo
Three,
universal.
selfless
El
service.
tercero,
Human beings
servicio
want to
desinteresado.
give
Los seres
selfless
humanos
service,
quieren
and they can give selfless service.
ayudar desinteresadamente.
Number four,
Y 4,
ultimately, human
últimamente
beings
los
want
seres humanos
spiritual
quieren alcanzar
emancipation,
la emancipación
to
espiritual.
become one ultimately with the source from which they come.
Últimamente hacerse uno con la fuente de
These
espiritualidad.
are considered to be the four
Estos se consideran
fundamental
los 4
characteristics of human
características
beings.
fundamentales de los seres humanos.
Drawing on the wisdom of the ancient mystics.
Esto
They did not invent
surge de los
dharma,
místicos
they merely
sabios
discovered it.
antiguos. Esto no fue
Dharma
descubierto ahora.
existed prior
Esto
to human
existía
beings.
antes de los seres humanos.
So we see again these four
Entonces vemos de nuevo
aspects
estos
of
4
dharma.
aspectos:
Expansion of mind, bringing
expansión,
this higher flow,
llegando a un
selfless
flujo
service,
mayor,
spiritual emancipation.
servicio desinteresado y emancipación
And in
espiritual.
this way, human beings are
Y de esta
able to
manera,
develop
los seres
themselves
humanos son
at the
capaces de
physical level,
desarrollarse de un nivel
the
físico
emotional level,
a un nivel
the
emocional,
mental level,
a un nivel
and
mental
ultimately
y
the
últimamente
spiritual level,
al
level
nivel
of our
espiritual,
deepest
el
inner
nivel de
pure state
nuestro
of
más
consciousness.
profundo estado de conciencia.
So this is the answer to the question,
Esta es la respuesta
what
a la
is human
pregunta
purpose?
de
What are we
cuál
here
es el
for?
propósito del ser humano,
And if we
para
can
qué estamos
answer
aquí.
that question,
Si podemos contestar esa
then we
pregunta,
have a possibility
tenemos la
of
posibilidad
creating a society that
de
is
crear una
in
sociedad
line with
que está en línea
that
con esto,
deep human purpose.
con este propósito
If we can't
profundo.
if we can't answer the question, what
Si
is
no podemos
human
responder
purpose,
esa pregunta de cuál es el
then
propósito
the chance of
humano, las
creating a
posibilidades de
society that
crear una
fulfills that
sociedad
human purpose, of course, will be
que
very
satisfaga
small.
eso serán muy
So,
pequeñas.
from this viewpoint,
Entonces, desde el
this
punto de
part is
vista,
very important.
esta
To
parte es
have
muy importante.
clear understanding of
Para
what
tener
human purpose is,
entendimiento claro cuál es el
to
propósito
guide
y entender
how
eso
we create a
y
proper
usar
human
eso
society.
para crear como guía para crear una sociedad.
So we had this pre-colonial
Entonces
phase
tenemos
in
una
African history, we
fase
had the colonial
precolonial
phase,
en la historia de África, una época colonial, después una
so
época
much debate
neocolonial, que hoy se habla mucho de eso, con Francia sobre
we had
todo,
this post-colonial
y tenemos un capitalismo postcolonial.
phase, largely
Y últimamente,
capitalist in its nature and occasionally state capitalist in the case of
y ocasionalmente un Estado,
African socialist
capitalismo de
type
Estado,
model
y
that some
algunos
countries pursue.
cooperativas y
And
algunos
then we come
socialistas.
to a future possibility
Y
of
llegamos a una posibilidad futura
a very different social and economic
de una
system,
sociedad,
one
un
that would
sistema
be
social diferente.
cooperative led
Uno sería
and what we call
dirigido
a
por
three-tier
cooperativos,
that
el
would
que le llamamos
self-sufficient
una
to
economía
guarantee
en tres
minimum
partes
requirements. And that's the system that advocates that,
para
of course,
satisfacer
is
las mínimas
progressive
necesidades
utilization
de
theory
vida,
or Prout.
que es lo que la
So we're
teoría
going
de
to
la
look a
utilización
little
progresiva
bit at
Prout.
what Prout
Vamos a hablar un
would be
poco sobre esto
and
sería
what this Proutist model
y cuál es el modelo
represents,
Proutista
what it
que representa,
stands for,
qué es
and
lo que
presenting
defiende.
that as another pathway
Y
of
presentando
development,
esto como un camino diferente,
preferred pathway, in my opinion.
en mi opinión, el
And this
camino
is, of course, not restricted
preferible.
only to African
Por
socio-economic
supuesto, esto no se refiere
features,
al
but
futuro
literally,
económico de
globally.
África, sino globalmente.
Because all countries today, to a greater or lesser extent, are
Todos
at
los
that
países de alguna
capitalist or state
forma
capitalist
tienen un
level of
tipo de
development,
capitalismo de Estado
have
en su sistema de desarrollo.
pursued the capitalist or state capitalist model of social and
Es
economic
el
development
modelo.
and
que es-
created enormous problems,
Eso crea
some of
bastantes
which we touched
grandes
on earlier in that
problemas.
appraisal
Algunos ya
of
los hemos tocado antes.
capitalist globalization.
En la
So
globalización
let us
capitalista.
continue. I want to touch on the social dynamics
Quiero tocar un poco sobre la dinámica
of the
social
progressive utilization
de acuerdo
theory
con la
or
teoría de la
Prout.
utilización progresiva o
So I'm
Prout.
just going to explore briefly.
Vamos a
I think this
explorar
provides a
brevemente,
fantastic model of analysis
porque esto nos provee de un modelo de
societies.
análisis de las sociedades.
According to Prout,
De acuerdo con Prout,
human beings
los seres
can
humanos
be divided
pueden
into
ser
one of
divididos en
four
4
social psychologies.
psicologías sociales.
That of the laborer,
Los
manual laborer,
trabajadores
that of the
manuales,
warrior, that
guerreros,
of the intellectual,
los intelectuales
that of the merchant.
y los mercaderes o
We may possess more than
comerciantes.
one of them, but generally one
Podemos-
of those four
Podemos
predominates
pertenecer a
in
más
any
de uno,
individual.
pero normalmente uno de ellos
And it's not
prevalece
only
en
individuals.
cada individuo. Y no solamente los
The point
individuos.
comes where
El
three
punto
out of
llega un
those
momento
four
en que tres de
social
estos,
psychologies will
uno de estas,
aggregate together, will form
tres
a
de estas
collective
psicologías sociales
society,
se juntan
and ultimately one of those three
y últimamente
will
una de las
come to
tres
dominate the society
domina la
or
sociedad
rule the
o
society.
gobierna la sociedad.
Now, those three are the warrior, the intellectual,
Estos
and the
tres son
merchant.
los guerreros, los intelectuales y los comerciantes.
So we can analyze human history in its totality
Podemos analizar
and
toda la
see
historia
that
humana
any particular part
y
of
ver
that
que
human history was dominated by one of
en
these four
alguna época
psychologies.
cualquiera de la historia humana ha estado
There was a
siempre
very long period where the laborist psychology ruled the ancient human society.
en los seres humanos más primitivos
We may
estaban
assume
dominados
that
por la sociedad de
continuity for
más
hundreds of thousands of years.
por cientos de miles de años, la mentalidad del trabajador
And
manual.
then we see the rise of a
Y
warrior
entonces
class
vemos el
that
surgir
eventually
de la
rose
clase
and
de guerrera
came to dominate the society.
que comenzaron a dominar la sociedad.
And eventually that
Y
phase, and
eventualmente
that
esa
phase lasted
fase
also a very long time
también duró
in
mucho
human
tiempo
history,
en la historia
where
humana,
warriors were
donde los guerreros
dominating the society. They were
dominaban la sociedad,
warrior societies.
unas sociedades guerreras.
And in a more recent phase of human history, there came the time where intellectuals rose.
Y luego en una
and
historia más
power
reciente,
passed from
los
warriors to
intelectuales pasaron a controlar la sociedad,
And
pasaron de los
again,
guerreros a
in
los
the
intelectuales.
context of modern human history,
En
we
el contexto
see
de la
a
historia
transition
moderna
from
humana,
the society
vemos una
dominated by
transición
intellectuals,
de
in
las
fact, usually
sociedades
in the form
controladas
of
por intelectuales,
priests and
que eran
religions,
sacerdotes, religiones,
and we finally saw power
y
pass
finalmente
to the
vemos
merchant
últimamente a
social
la época de
psychology.
una mentalidad
So
social
this
capitalista
framework
comerciante.
provides a very nice way of understanding
Esto nos provee un método de
our human
entender
history.
la historia humana.
And we can look at any particular country in
Y
terms
podemos ver a
of
cualquier país
when these four groups ruled.
y vemos cuándo uno de estos
And we
grupos
may ask the
estaba
question indeed,
gobernando,
which social psychology
y podemos
dominates
ver
today?
y podemos preguntarnos qué tipo de
In fact, we'll
mentalidad
ask that
gobierna
question
hoy.
shortly.
Por supuesto, luego lo preguntamos.
So this social cycle, as it's referred
Este
to,
ciclo social
has three parts to it.
tiene tres partes.
There is the phase of development,
Hay
the rising of
el surgir
that
de una nueva psicología
society.
social,
Let's say the rise of the
Cuando-
warrior society.
por ejemplo, cuando surge la
It reaches
mentalidad
a
guerrera,
point of pause in its
llega a un
development,
punto de
and then
pausa en
it
su
goes
desarrollo
into a phase of
y
decline,
comienza a crear
degeneration,
una fase de
of
degeneración
retardation,
o una retardación cuando empieza a explotar a las otras.
characterized by exploitation
Se caracteriza por la explotación
of
de esa
the
clase de
mass
los.
of the society. And it's good again, this provides a nice
Esto nos provee una muy buena herramienta
analytic
para
tool to look
analizar,
again at
para
any
analizar
given society and
en
to
cualquier
assess,
sociedad
are
hoy
they in the benevolent phase,
y-
in
y-
the
y
rising phase, are they at a
evaluar
pause point,
en qué
or
fase
indeed are they in
estamos.
the phase
Si
of
estamos en una fase de
degeneration?
que está surgiendo, está habiendo un progreso o una degeneración.
Graphically, we may depict
Gráficamente
that
podemos ver
the
estos.
rising phase is, on
La-
average, is beneficial to the society.
Cuando surge
Is
es
more
una nueva
positive
fase
than negative.
benevolente
Not
y
to say
beneficia a la
it's all
sociedad.
positive by any means, but
Y-
the positives outweigh the negatives
Y luego
as that new social psychology or social
entonces
order
siempre suele
rises.
positivo
And then
el
when it
surgir de una
moves
nueva
into
mentalidad, pero
pause and then
llega un
finally
momento en
into
una pausa
retardation or
y después llega
degeneration,
una retarda
it has a
o
negative impact
degeneración,
on the
tiene un
society
impacto negativo
and
en
on
la
the
sociedad
welfare of
y en
the
el
people of the society.
bienestar de las personas de esa sociedad.
This is representing the
Esto
dominance of negative
representa la
tendencies in
dominación de las
society,
tendencias
negative
negativas,
forces, negative agendas,
fuerzas adármicas, regresivas,
translated into
estáticas
negative
o Avidia Maya,
policies of governments.
con las políticas negativas de los
Negative, or
gobiernos.
we may say misplaced or ignorant
Podemos decir que
social and
negativo
economic policies.
ignorantes, políticas socioeconómicas ignorantes.
And here
Y aquí representaría las tendencias positivas, progresivas, innovación.
It's not to say there aren't negatives. We see here on the right side there are negative.
No quiere decir que no haya negativas. Ves, aquí en la derecha siempre hay tendencias negativas, pero se correlacionan y tienen más fuerza las positivas. Va surgiendo las tendencias positivas. De acuerdo con la dinámica de Prout, el ciclo social de Prout, las sociedades pasan de una fase de control de los guerreros, después de que degeneran, comienzan a controlar a los intelectuales en forma de sacerdotes, surgen, influyen en la sociedad, dominan la sociedad, pero inevitablemente pasa en una retardación, una degeneración, y después las condiciones se crean para la sociedad de los comerciantes surgir en la sociedad. Inevitablemente ellos también llegan a la fase de degeneración. Este modelo, el ciclo social, es una herramienta muy poderosa para entender la dinámica de una sociedad, tanto en el pasado como ahora mismo, en el momento presente. Esta persona particular, curiosamente, es un gestor de fondos. Es uno de, no sé cómo lo llaman, hedge fund. Este manejo de fondos, el buitre o fondos, él ha concebido una forma de desarrollo muy parecida. Él habla del surgir de una sociedad, los puntos donde llega a la cima y la fase de decline. Y estos son los puntos que él cree que caracterizan las distintas fases. Entonces la fase que surge se caracteriza por una lideranza fuerte, por inventos, educación, cultura fuerte, una buena alocación de los recursos, buena competitividad y un crecimiento de los ingresos. En la fase de crecimiento. Cuando llega a la fase de la cima, hay menos productivo, se extiende demasiado, pierde competitividad y hay abismos en el desarrollo, inigualdad. Y entonces la fase de declinio, hay grandes deudas, se impresa dinero, conflictos internos, pérdida de las reservas económicas, lideranza débil y guerras civiles o revueltas, revoluciones. Yo me quedé muy sorpreso de que un manejador de fondos, un ícono del capitalismo avanzado, ha concebido este modelo, porque de alguna manera correlaciona bastante con el modelo análisis de Prout. Lo que queremos mover desde un punto de vista de Prout, como articulado por Prabharanya Sarkar, Sarkar quería que en la fase de degeneración y la fase de retardación sea minimizada y que una fase de benevolente se inicie tan pronto, lo más rápido posible. Y cuando esa nueva fase, ves aquí en esta fase, cuando una nueva fase de la dinámica social siempre comienza a llegar a retardarse, que rápidamente se cambia y se minimice la fase de explotación y se crea un control en la nueva clase psicológica. Este es el contraste con el movimiento sistáltico espontáneo que ha surgido hasta ahora en la historia humana. Este es un movimiento siempre hacia arriba. Moviendo a través de las distintas fases. De las fases sucesivas del ciclo social. Esto es lo que queremos. ¿Cómo llegamos ahí? Bueno, vamos a tener que introducir una nueva psicología social para hacer esto, para minimizar la fase de degeneración en el ciclo social, para minimizar y traerlo a la fase siguiente. ¿Cuál es la quinta psicología social que lo que defiende Sarkar? Es lo que se llama Sadvipras. También se llama como revolucionarios espirituales.
Development of human society actually requires this fifth.
Entonces, ese movimiento progresivo continuo requiere la creación de ese nuevo tipo de lideranza. Sadvipras. Sadvipras o revoluciones espirituales poseen las cualidades de las 4 clases. Es trabajador, es guerrero, intelectual, es comerciante. Son desarrollados espiritualmente. Están dispuestos a sacrificarse por el bienestar de toda la sociedad. Tienen una moralidad incuestionable, imperturbable, y luchan contra la explotación de todas sus formas. Esta es la respuesta de Sarkar a la fase inevitable de la retardación del progreso en el ciclo social, en la fase de la degeneración. ¿En qué fase del ciclo social está África? Me gustaría hacer esta pregunta. Tenemos una idea del ciclo social. Ahora mi pregunta es, ¿en qué fase del ciclo social está África?
What sort of answer did we get regarding the question of which Varna might dominate in Africa? Or is it varied across different nations? So who...
Dada, you can maybe review what people said in the English.
Okay.
And in other languages, people can type in the chat, and Dada Gyanananda can translate for us.
Okay, so our group sort of looked at the impact that colonization had on it, and that it, so our group looked at the idea that, our group looked at the idea that the natural flow of the social cycle got interrupted and disturbed by colonization, and that maybe it was in a phase, at least in some nations, in the warrior era, and then the imperialist nations were in the merchant era and started to impose this merchant element into what previously may have been a warrior. So it's, and then there was also the idea that disgruntled intellectuals were also created in this history and that they are also there. Okay, who would like to speak next? Who can speak on behalf of their group? Oh, they're writing it in the chat, are they? Let's have a look.
The answers are not there in the chat.
Namaskar.
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 I can try to say what I heard a little bit. Some believe that there is some type of transition in the masses, moving from a rigid type of Katra era towards intellectual era. But at the same time, some comments were made in some groups that these changes are taking place a little differently from country to country. From my looking from outside and from the history of Africa, I know that in Africa there's many empires in the past which were highly developed and had passed through all these different areas where the priest classes, for example, they ruled in some countries. So even intellectual era came. The kings of Africa were advised by the priests. So they were not just some type of pure Catrian era. So at this moment, as you said, with colonization, we can see this capitalistic colonialism, neocolonialism, and post-colonialism, which is also colonialism, has imposed its will on the masses of Africa, and it has become those who rule the society are capitalists through militaries, through few intellectuals have taken power. Even when they take power, they behave like some dictators. So we can say capitalism and militaries are in league there. Maybe somebody can say and maybe add on or contradict. It will be nice to have different opinions. That is a very good question that Dada made.
Right, thank you, Dada.
Ishtadeva, allons-y.
Yeah, Dada, namaskar, Dada, Rabishikaranana, namaskar.
Namaskar.
Please, Dada, it may be a challenging question, but what are the criteria to identify a specific psychology in the social cycle?
Great question. Yeah, because I think it's more than just who ends up holding power. So in the case of a warrior uprising that catches power, it need not represent that the actual society has entered at all into a Catrian or warrior era. So what characterizes that era will be much deeper than just who nominally holds power. So it'll be at the deep level of the masses, at the cultural level, at their sense of what we call in our yoga philosophy, the prana dharma, somehow would. So it's a much deeper thing than just who holds power or who catches power. And yeah, that's something maybe we could look at another time, unless anyone wants to make a further comment on that point.
Shiva, Shiva, can you speak? Est-ce que tu peux parler là?
Oui,
Oui, allez-y.
oui. Tout à l'heure, dans notre groupe, on a essayé de discuter et j'ai émis mon point de vue. Si vous regardez même actuellement en Afrique, malgré les militaires qui prennent le pouvoir, là, c'est une réaction à quelque chose. C'est-à-dire qu'on voudrait passer d'une ère à une autre.
Alors, I'll translate for the speaker.
Donc,
Groupe, on n'arrive pas à vous écouter ici. Moi, j'ai vu que tu traduisais là, mais tu traduisais pour les gens qui vous écoutaient en français.
oui, oui.
So what he said is
Grouvat,
that despite the militaries in Africa today taking power, it doesn't mean necessarily that the era is Catrian, and it signals a desire to change from one era to another.
donc, je disais qu'en fait, ce sont les prémices. Nous sommes dans une période de transition entre la psychologie guerrière et l'ère des intellectuels. Donc, juste une période de transition. Parce que tous ces temps qu'on a vécu ici, pour la plupart des cas, on était forcé de faire de travaux qu'on ne voulait pas. En fait, c'était des militaires, l'esprit guerrier qui dominait. Maintenant, on est en train de réagir face à cette domination des guerriers. Nous voulons passer maintenant vers l'ère des intellectuels. C'est comme ça que nous voyons tout le temps, on parle de l'état des droits, on parle de beaucoup de choses. Donc, on veut se sortir de cette ère des guerriers. Voilà, ça c'est un peu mon point de vue.
So what he says that the changes which are seen now are clearly a tendency of moving from a Catrian era towards the intellectual era, but it is not yet fully. But you can see in the slogan, in the speeches, people are speaking of a state based on law, state rule based on law, and so he believes is a change into this. I wanted to say something to Ravi Shekaranji. When we decide which van is dominating, isn't it that you have to see which is the dominating force behind those who are holding power and who actually are running the society? So I would say the capitalists are running Africa through buying presidents and paying militaries, and maybe now a change is coming up. If it is really a change, as you put a question on the situation of Niger, we don't yet know what are these guys really, whether they are revolutionaries or they're just opportunists wearing a hat of revolutionary to get the masses. So still most leaders in Africa, those who were type of revolutionary were killed, and those who maintain power were allied with the colonialism type of mind.
Thank you, Dr. Great insight. Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Javon. Yes, go ahead.
Ok. Oui,
Hi, Javon.
moi je voudrais, ce que moi je vois, c'est-à-dire mon opinion est que les sociétés qu'on avait en Afrique avant l'arrivée des colons, ce pas des grandes sociétés, c'est des petites. C'est vrai que dans le passé lointain, on avait des empires, et ces empires ont été, c'est-à-dire fractionnalisés en petits groupes de sociétés aujourd'hui, jusqu'à l'arrivée des colons. Et quand les colons sont venus, ils nous ont colonisés. Donc, on n'avait pas de tendance comme ça réelle, tendance qui soit africaine. proprement dite. Okay. Mais après, c'est-à-dire le départ des colons aussi, il n'y avait pas une société organisée jusqu'à présent. La preuve, c'est aucun pays africain n'a une constitution digne, hein, d'une nation. On n'a pas de constitution qui intègre nos valeurs, nos intérêts en tant que peuple africain. Mais aujourd'hui, ce qu'on peut voir, nous sommes dans le cafouillage. Il n'y a pas quelqu'un où, c'est-à-dire, rassembler le peuple et puis établir une constitution qui lie tout le monde, hein, sous forme de nations. Donc, on n'a pas de nations. On n'a pas de nations, pas encore. Donc, il est difficile de déterminer quel genre de choses-là, c'est-à-dire quelle époque nous sommes dans le cycle social. C'est très, très difficile. C'est-à-dire, après le départ des colons, les gens qui ont pris le pouvoir, même si les militaires, ils deviennent capitalistes. Si les capitalistes, ils continuent à être plus capitalistes. Si les, etc., ouvriers, ils deviennent capitalistes. Vous voyez? Donc, tout est déterminé par l'argent. Aujourd'hui, on vit ce qui se passe dans certains pays, en Afrique de l'Ouest, par exemple, et Afrique centrale. Je pense que, bien, on souhaite que ces gens-là aient l'idée de création d'une nation, hein, digne de ce terme. Et donc, c'est une question très, très difficile. On n'a même pas encore commencé pour dire que on est. C'est difficile à déterminer.
Okay, I'll translate a little bit what you said a while ago to those who are in English. So what you said is that though that before is true, it is true that you had empires in the past in Africa, but before the arrival of colonizations, those empires were dismantled already. Some of them were dismantled, we can say, because some were still existing. I know the Empire of Congo was very strong at that time, and it resisted from 1482 to the beginning of real colonization, 400 years of attempt to enter into that continent. But after that dismantlement and the colonization came, there was no real identity as Africa and little identity of nation. So the nationhood is something new, and the idea of a whole continent also is also new. Then he says that during colonization, also that process went on in the same way. And after colonization, those leaders who came into power did not really even create constitutions which would define properly what is a nation, what is a country. So he feels and understands that we are in a big mess because there was no clarity of what we are as a team, as a group of people. And the capitalistic era, which is imposing itself on the whole world, ended up imposing itself on Africa. So he finds it difficult to define what Varna, what class, what social class is dominating the continent. I think your microphone is closer there.
Thank you very much, Dariji. That's great. Really good points made there. Dada Maheshwarananda, would you like to make a comment?
We have time for questions and answers that will continue for another 30 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to say to conclude before we go to questions and answers?
Yeah, let me share the screen again. There's a few more concepts that I'd like to bring in.
Go ahead.
There is a question here of Guruvati asking, did the colonizers really leave the continent? Something interesting.
Dada, let Dada finish first,
Yeah.
and then we can answer the questions.
Okay.
Okay. This is looking at a successful Sadvipra guided, we can say, warrior-led society. And the green circle around the red warrior portion is the idea that the Sadvipras, these spiritual revolutionaries, are in place guiding the Kshatriya rulership. So the warriors here have got the guidance of the Sadvipras. Okay, so there's that one. Now, just for the sake of theory, the same would happen if the Sadvipras were leading the transition from warrior to intellectual society. So here the Sadvipras are having that influence on the rulership of the intellectual class. So this is where we want to bring things to, that the Varnas continue to move, the social cycle continues to move, but the Sadvipras are in place to see that the society progresses, that moves positively, benevolently for the welfare of all in the society. And theoretically, again, it's some future point where the transition goes from intellectual to merchant society. Again, where the Sadvipras are in place, then we get the benevolent merchant society. And of course, at the point at which that goes into decline, into retardation, degeneration, then those Sadvipras shift it to the next phase of the social cycle. Okay, so there's that concept which I think we're familiar with. This is simply another way of looking at it. Okay, these slides are really now talking about, in the case that Africa really does have a merchant elite, which is to say the colonial imperial powers, if they put in place a merchant class that in the post-colonial phase took up power, if that's really the case, then we have to assess at which phase in the social cycle we are in any given nation of Africa. And would it necessarily be the case that it's in the phase of degeneration where intellectuals and warriors have been reduced to laborers also? So there's that concept there. And of course, whether disgruntled workers have been created. This, I think, very much applies to the much of the rest of the world. Certainly to the Western capitalist nations, where we really do have a very emergent group of disgruntled workers. And I think following the recent pandemic, that group became bigger than ever. And then we know the dynamic by which the social cycle shifts. It is the alliance between the intellectuals and the warriors, striking merchant power. We call that Shudra revolution. In the case that a warrior class is exploiting the society, then the dynamic of change might be represented like this. It would be intellectual revolution, or rather intellectual, it could be evolution also, against the warrior class, and the possibility arises where the society transitions to the intellectual class. That may have been, for example, I don't know if this is true. That may have been the pre-colonial situation of some nations of Africa. In the case they were led by warrior societies, if those societies had gone into the retardation phase, degeneration phase, then the dynamic to shift that could be represented in this way. Okay, so I think we can leave it at that, and let's go to the questions. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and let's open it up to the questions. So I see here, did the colonizers really leave Africa after independence? And, well, in the light of recent events in West Africa, it's pretty clear that no, they didn't. In the case of a number of countries, and the ongoing presence of France in some of those West African countries. And in that case, maybe we would define that as actually a phase of neo-colonialism, where the financial system, the monetary system continued to be controlled by the colonizing power. And many other very bizarre conditions imposed upon some of those nations. For example, the continued use of the French language, the use of the currency, the training of the military leaders was to be done by the colonizing power. So this is not independence. I think that's what we would call neo-colonialism. Next question here.
If you look farther up, there are 5 questions from Paramashiva.
Oh, above.
You see them?
Above or below?
Above previously.
Oh dear.
What is the fundamental difference between globalization and universalism was the first question.
Okay. Well, the context that we speak about globalization is very different than the context we talk about universalism. So globalization relates to the late phase of capitalism, where it has managed to open up markets globally and impose the trading regimes on a global scale. So at least one interpretation of globalization is that. And it's often happening through these unions, such as the European Union, the African Union, the North American Union is there with Canada, the US, and Mexico. Through vehicles like the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, but where the underlying driver is capitalism itself, is the agenda, let's say, of the advanced capitalist class. Universalism, in the context that we would use it in Prout, is completely the opposite of that. It's a complete different concept, where it's talking about the oneness of all nations, the oneness of all people, the recognition of the existential rights of all people, and not only human beings, indeed extending beyond that. So it's a completely different idea there. Dada, can you read the next question?
Yanananda, there are 2 questions in French from Jai Gopal and from Alma Gluchadan, but they're in French, so you need to translate them into the chat. The next question, and well, Joppa puts out the points, some possible characteristics of rule by Varnas. For the warrior era, he says, one personality and state organization. For intellectuals, you have belief, ideology, and social organization. And for the capitalist class, you have systems of exchange and economic organization.
Great. Thank you, Japa. That's great.
The next question was, is globalization a change of sentimental strategy by capitalists in order to operate more efficiently?
I think there are sentimental elements used to support the process of globalization. P.R. Sarkar talks about what he calls metamorphose sentimental strategies. And I think this is a very, very important concept today. It talks about the changing, the ever-changing sentiments or sentimental strategies used by the elites to move towards their objectives, the realizing, materializing of their objectives. And that relates to globalization. For example, climate change, I think there is definitely an argument to suggest that climate change has been used as a sentimental strategy, irrespective of whether indeed it's happening or it isn't. It has been packaged as a sentimental strategy to support the idea of all sorts of regulations at a global level, which is to say, in support of globalization, and ultimately of the idea of a world government. Now, world government was very strongly supported in Prout and advocated by P.R. Sarkar, but it's nothing at all to do with the world government that is being hinted at today, because the world government being offered to humanity today is a world government dominated by a financial merchant elite, by an oligarchy. And various sentimental strategies are being used to lend support to that idea. But we have to be very, very aware that in the advanced stage of degeneration of the social cycle, all manner of deceptions and manipulations of sentiments will be used in order to advance the agenda of the merchant oligarchy. And what is that agenda today? It is, in my opinion, it is nothing less than the capturing of the planet itself, the establishment of merchant elite rule on a global scale. That is, to me, what the program of advanced capitalism is today. Other people may have very different opinions on that. I accept that. But that's the conclusion I have reached from the type of research and analysis I've been engaged in. Can we...
He asks, for Africa, the first step is to raise the awareness of the new generation, even for the creation of a Sadvipra society, spirituality is a fundamental basis for awareness, especially in Africa. Otherwise, Africa will always have the same problems and will always remain the prey of the capitalists.
Well done. Perfectly said.
From
Maybe go ahead, Dada.
The next question from Jaya Gopal: what does it take for Africa to have Sadvipras, and how do we know that this person is a Sadvipra?
Great question, and it's the crucial question to be asked everywhere in the world today. According to those diagrams I was showing, the Sadvipra presence is essential at this phase of history. The only good outcome for the ongoing development of the human species is the creation and presence of Sadvipras in the social cycle, in the society. So your question is perfect. And I think P.R. Sarkar gave many means and ways by which Sadvipras get created. And the previous comment was underlying the importance of spiritual education and the role that plays, moral education, because the foundation of the Sadvipras is morality, are the cardinal human values. And all these can be taught. We need an expansive ideology, which we have, I believe, today. We need alternatives to the current system, social and economic. I think we have those alternatives today, but they definitely need to be taught. So the conclusion I have reached is that our attention has to go towards the creation of Sadvipras as a key part of Proutist strategy. And let's meet together at our local levels and look at what P.R. Sarkar has advised and what other moralist organization and groups are doing, and start building that network, what P.R. Sarkar called uniting the moralists. So I think everything is available for us to effectively do this. We have to do it, and we have to come to a level of organizing ourselves in our collectives with passion and revolutionary spirit to undertake this. And I think it's somehow starting. What I'm seeing it's starting. Thank you, Dada.
Yadagyanananda asks, what is the real goal of this present system of domination of the human race? It seems to go beyond mere hoarding of wealth. It seems full spectrum control is the aim. And what would that serve? What would be a perpetual enslavement of the human race by the few? 1% against 99%? Yadagyanananda's question.
Perfect question, Dadaji. Really great point. Yeah, it's bewildering, but I think P.R. Sarkar has also given the reply to that in a discourse where he talked about where the mind is dominated by matter, where the focus of the human mind is on matter. It crudifies the mind. And he used the expression, a mind dominated by carbonic pabulum. And he said the natural outcome of that is imperialism. And that's what we're looking at. But it's not the, you know, the imperialism of the days of the British Empire. It's not even the imperialism of the American Empire, which uses the vehicle of something like 1,000 military bases globally. And some of those military bases are in Africa. And some of the leaders of African nations don't want those military bases in their country. And I think it does come back to the mind that has dominated itself with matter. It has degraded. It's combined with power, and global empire becomes the net result. And it's, you know, we're at a crossroads where either we allow that future to play out, and let's face it, the majority of the world's material resources are controlled by these particular elite groups of people, or we shift that onto a completely different trajectory. I think we actually have the choice here. And for me at this moment, to be able to make that shift requires this selfless group of fearless moralists that we've been calling Sadvipras. So from this viewpoint, the creation of these people, which is to say the creation of ourselves as Sadvipras and others as Sadvipras, becomes a very important priority. And if we can do that effectively, with all sincerity and dedication and mobilization, then I think we will get a lot of, let's say, help in that effort. And I think we will open up a completely new path of development for the human species. Thank you, Dadaji.
Everyone, in the chat, I have put the YouTube channel, Amandla African Samaj. You can see the recordings of the previous lectures, classes in the different languages. Also in the chat is the evaluation link where you can evaluate this class, please, so that we can improve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dadaji. So there's no more questions from anyone, no more comments?
There's always more questions. Maradona in Puerto Rico asks, how is morality taught?
Oui, je peux poser une question là-dedans, si possible.
Okay, well, in our yoga teaching, of course, we have a very developed set of moral principles, and we have been teaching these moral principles for a very long time, and they can be taught, you know, by someone who is sincerely following those points and trying to sincerely making the effort to follow those principles. That person can teach these principles to other people. But I think it's more than just moral principles to be taught. I think it's really a very integrated package today. And to some extent, you know, we have that, I think, in our amongst those teaching Prout and those teaching the spiritual practices also. However, I'm also of the opinion that society is dynamic, and new things are always arising, and new ways of doing things better. And that's a challenge for us. How to reach, a mass of people with these teachings, these trainings that we have. It's a very different world today than, even 20 years ago. It's a completely different world, and it's changing rapidly. And we have to keep pace with that so that we can be effective in our role of sharing these liberating concepts and ideas. But I think largely we know what to teach. We have the challenge now to find what are the most effective means to be able to broadcast that to a mass of awakening people. That's the key point. There are a mass of awakening people today. And with every abuse of the oligarchy, of this merchant elite, whether locally, nationally, or globally, with each abuse, it awakens more people up. And that's a great thing. Our time is coming. That's what I see very, very strongly. Our time is coming. And we are going to have to run to keep up with this incredible progressive flow that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dada.
Okay.
And everyone, thank you.
Thank you, Dadaji, and thank you for everyone for joining this evening and supporting. Thank you so much. I hope we can meet again and talk more.